UFC Las Vegas betting and DraftKings show. We have 14 fights this Saturday afternoon. I'm on a couple underdogs this week. I think dogs are barking. I'm going to cover all that and then more on today's show. I'm Jon Kelly. Let's hear the picks. Kicking things off in the flyweight division, we have Bruno Silva coming off a sizable layoff. He's the favorite at minus 210. The comeback on Tyson Nam is plus 170. And I like the Bruno Silva side in this matchup. I think early prices on him were pretty good. And I think even despite coming off the long layoff, I do think this is a good stylistic matchup for him. Bruno Silva is a guy who has power on the feet. He's coming off back-to-back knockout victories, but he also has a strong ground game. We know he's the training partner, longtime protege, some would say, of Henry Cejudo. And you see that with the ground game. He averages over a couple takedowns per 15 minutes. Not a great control grappler. And on the feet, I mentioned the power. The one concern is that he's very reckless defensively. You see him get hit quite a bit in a lot of his fights. That is a concern here when facing a power puncher counter striker like Tyson Nam, who basically, that's his only way to win fights. He's a very low volume, never going to look to grapple. He's just looking to land that one big counter shot. And yes, that's possible here, but I don't think it's all that likely. So we're going Bruno Silva by decision because Tyson Nam is tough to get out of there. So I lean decision, but regardless, Bruno Silva historically is a very good DraftKings points per minute scorer. So I don't mind him at 8,900. I think he's a solid target this week, and I think he gets his hand raised. Next fight up in the bantamweight division, Victor Henry comes in as a minus 140 favorite. The comeback on Tony Gravely is plus 120. And this is a matchup where I think you're probably better off looking for a live entry on Victor Henry because I actually think Gravely wins round one at a decent clip here. Tony Gravely is a guy who I've historically been higher on than the market, and it's burned me once or twice in some of his recent fights. Javid Bashrat was chirping me on Twitter for some of my pre-game talk heading into that fight, so hand up, that's on me, but I'm jumping off the Tony Gravely fanboy train this weekend because I don't think it's a good matchup for him. I think the biggest thing that stuck out to me in this matchup is the cardio dynamic because Tony Gravely, despite the high-level wrestling, averages over 6.5 takedowns per 15 minutes, gonna push that high wrestling pace early. He can't keep that up, and a lot of times he just slows after round one to the point where he's wilting as the fight gets extended. And now he's facing a guy in Victor Henry who historically has shown some pretty solid takedown defense. He's also a BJJ black belt. He's got some decent submissions on his record, and that's the one thing with Gravely is despite the cardio issue, the fight IQ is also an issue. He's constantly sticking his head where it doesn't belong. He's been submitted 5 times in his career, multiple times by guillotine. I would not be surprised to see him gas out here and potentially give up his neck. Regardless, I think as the fight goes on, Victor Henry has the volume and the cardio to take over as the fight goes on. So Victor Henry by decision is going to be the official pick. I do like this fight on DraftKings. Victor Henry, 8,400. Tony Gravely, 7,800. So they're priced favorable in the mid-range where I think a victory on either side is probably going to score pretty well. And even though I think I lean on the Henry side, I'm going to have a decent amount of exposure to Tony Gravely because in his victories, as you can see, he scores very high on DraftKings. So I'm not going to ignore the upside that Gravely possesses. And I think this is just a slate in general where I'm kind of living in that mid-range. There's not a ton of really expensive fighters that I like this week or that I think are safe this week, but I love that low to mid 8K range where these guys are at. So I'm going to be targeting a lot of these fighters this week. Next fight up, we have JJ Aldridge, a minus 400 favorite. The comeback on Ariana Lipsky is plus 310. And I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this matchup because I don't think it's one that we want to target for DraftKings purposes. I do think JJ Aldridge is the rightful favorite. Minus 400 is starting to get a little bit crazy. I think it's an easy pass though. Aldridge is a southpaw boxer, decent boxer, pretty durable. Does have the potential to land takedowns here against Ariana Lipsky, who can't defend takedowns. She has no idea how to get up off her back when she is taken down. But in terms of the striking, I do think it's going to play out pretty even, and I don't think we can really think that Aldridge is going to come in here chain wrestling. She averages just under 1 takedown per 15 minutes. But I think all of those things factored in, that's why she's the rightful favorite. I just don't trust her to pay off that DraftKings salary. She's very expensive this week. And while I think she wins, I doubt she has enough output and I don't rate her finishing ability very highly in this matchup. Even though Lipsky's been knocked out 4 times in her career, I just don't think Aldridge has enough power to get her out of there. So I think it's going to be Aldridge decision, no interest on DraftKings or the betting market this week. Which brings us to our next fight, as Mario Bautista comes in as the biggest betting favorite on the card at minus 1100. The comeback on Guido Canetti is plus 650. And this is a matchup where I think it's pretty cut and dry that Mario Bautista is being set up here to run through Guido Canetti, who's nearly 44 years old now. Despite being 44 years old, he does have 2 straight finishes, first round finishes in the UFC, so you can't rule him out completely. He clearly has power early in fights, and we have seen Bautista hurt and knocked out before. The Trevin Jones fight comes to mind, but skill for skill, I just think Bautista's a very promising prospect with a bright future. I think he's better than Guido Canetti everywhere the fight goes. Outside of some sort of fluky head kick knockout early, I think he takes care of business here, takes him down, and ends up submitting Guido Canetti. Now, in terms of DraftKings, $9,700, which we haven't seen that price in a while. Historically, it's going to take a lot for him to finish on the optimal lineup at that price. And on a 14-fight slate, I just think there's so many other options. So even though I think the finish is super likely, and I think he's one of the safer options this week, especially when you're talking above the 9K price range on DraftKings, I'm probably not going to have a lot of Mario Bautista, and in turn, not much of this fight either. Next fight up in the middleweight division, we have Cedricus Dumas, a minus 210 favorite. The comeback on Josh Fremd is plus 170. And this is a really interesting matchup because on one hand, we have Dumas, who's coming off the Contender Series this past season. He's making his UFC debut. He's a 7-0 prospect. Multiple wins have come inside the distance. All but one win actually have come via finish. He seems to be very powerful, very athletic, has explosive leg kicks that he's finished multiple opponents with. And of course, we saw him win by submission in the first round on that Contender Series fight. Now, that's all fine and good, but I still have some serious question marks about this guy. For starters, he was an underdog coming into that Contender Series fight because of the fact that he is extremely raw and because he had yet to face any real competition on the regional scene, and submitting a glory kickboxer like Pinaz on the Contender Series inside of 1 minute just really doesn't tell me much of anything. And then on the flip side, I just think it's a really easy buy low spot on Josh Fremd, who made his short notice UFC debut against Anthony Hernandez, looked much, much better than a lot of people gave him credit for, myself included, landed a takedown of his own in that fight, ended up reversing Hernandez as well. And that was after being taken down and ragdolled for much of the first 7 minutes in that fight. So that showed me he at least is tough, he at least has heart, and he's not a terrible wrestler either. He wrestled all 4 years in high school. We've seen him go to his wrestling on the regional scene as well. I would not be so confident that somebody's just going to come in here and everybody that faced him is going to be able to wrestle him just because he faced Anthony Hernandez, who's one of the better wrestlers in the division, and then Trayshawn Gore, who's not a terrible wrestler either and is very athletic and powerful. So I doubt Dumas has much of a grappling path here. The only time he looked to wrestle on the regional scene was in one of his fights where he faced a complete bum and he was unable to get the finish there. Now, on the feet, Josh Fremd is pretty hittable, and that is a concern because Dumas, like I said, he loves those head kicks. He's very powerful. He can hurt him on the feet early, but outside of that, I think Fremd's the better striker. He's much more technical, has a lot more tools. He's nasty in the clinch with his knees and elbows. He's got good low calf kicks as well. I think as the fight gets extended, you have to favor Josh Fremd here. And just because he's coming off that submission against Trayshawn Gore, I think that's why people are just like, oh, well, he's getting taken down and submitted by everybody, and Dumas is finishing everybody. I couldn't disagree more with the market consensus on this fight. So I'm actually in for up to 2 units now. I bet 1.5 units on Josh Fremd on the money line at plus 159. The line moved against me. I added 0.5 unit at plus 180. So I'm in deep on my boy Josh Fremd, but like I said, I think it's an easy buy low spot, and I think he gets it done for us. So we're going Fremd by late TKO in this one. Next fight up, we have Davy Grant, a minus 140 favorite with the comeback on Rafael Assuncao at plus 120. And I'll be honest, this is one of my lesser confident picks this week. I do lean Davy Grant here. I think he's the more active fighter. I think we can expect him to be the one doing more throughout the fight because Rafael Assuncao, while he is still a pretty solid fighter, he's always been low volume on the feet. I just think at nearly 41 years old, I just don't really trust the output. I don't really trust the durability at this stage in his career. And honestly, I just think Davy Grant's going to be the busier fighter. And if that's all I can really take away from this matchup, then I'm going to go with that. So I think it's Davy Grant. Really the only confident prediction I have of this fight is that it does go to decision. I'd be surprised to see a finish one way or the other. Both guys generally pretty durable, and I think this one goes over the 2.5. It is a little bit chalked up, but I do think this sees the judges' scorecard. So we're going Davy Grant 29-28. In terms of DraftKings, I just think there's better fights. I mentioned I'm going to be living in the mid-range on DraftKings, but this is like the one fight in the mid-range that I'm probably not going to have much exposure to. Next fight up in the heavyweight division, we have Carl Williams making his UFC debut. He's a -220 favorite. The comeback on Lucas Brzeski is +185. And I favor the Carl Williams side. Now, for starters, he fought on Contender Series last season. He fought Jimmy Lawson, who's a standout PSU wrestling alumni. I was not expecting Carl Williams to be able to basically ragdoll and manhandle Jimmy Lawson like that. It was a very impressive performance as an underdog, and that's why I think he does have at least a little bit of a ceiling, especially if you're going to match him up against these lower level guys like Lucas Brzeski, who also is a Contender Series grad from 2 seasons ago. Now, Brzeski, I think, is decent volume for the heavyweight division, does have a little bit of power, but his defensive grappling is basically no good. And I think over time, Carl Williams is going to be able to take him down multiple times here, wear on him, and potentially get a late finish as well. He landed 3 takedowns in that Contender Series fight, had over 10 minutes of control. I could see that happening here. And even though Brzeski's cardio did look a little bit better in his UFC debut against Martin Buday, I still think historically that's an issue for him. And against somebody that is going to force him to grapple for extended sequences here, I think Carl Williams is the play here at 9K. He's basically the only 9K and above fighter that I'm willing to be overweight on this weekend. I think he has a decent floor and a pretty high ceiling as well. So we're going Carl Williams by decision. That's going to be the official pick, even though a late stoppage would not surprise me either. And up next, we have our only light heavyweight matchup of the card. This one's currently lined as a pick'em as Anton Turkali takes on Vitor Petrino. Both of these guys are coming off Contender Series last season. Turkali has actually already made his UFC debut. They fed him to Jailton Almeida, who basically was able to run through him inside of 5 minutes and get him out of there. That's no surprise, but we're not going to knock him too much there. He did land 11 takedowns on his Contender Series fight, didn't get the finish, which was kind of alarming considering I think he could have if he really pushed it, but did seem to have a good gas tank and decent wrestling for this division. Now, on the flip side, Vitor Petrino is a very powerful, explosive athlete. He's an undefeated 7-0 prospect fighting out of Brazil. He got a finish on Contender Series, knocked a guy out in round 2, and that's basically how he wins all of his fights, because he's not a very good grappler, but he does have big power. And the way that he throws everything into his punches. He rips the body well, then comes up top to the head. He tries to take your head off. But if he doesn't connect, the way that he fights, he's naturally going to gas out. And we see that any of his fights get extended, he definitely starts to slow. So I think the logical pick would be Anton Turkali taking over as the fight goes on, making this guy wrestle repeatedly. That makes a ton of sense to me. But I also just see Turkali getting clipped bad in one of these exchanges, because the one thing is, both of these guys are super reckless defensively, specifically Turkali. When he's swinging in the pocket, he just completely disregards his defense. And I think doing that against Petrino, you're going to eat a really big shot here and maybe not wake up from it. So we're going Petrino by knockout, but honestly, this one can go either way. And the great thing is that regardless of who wins, if Petrino wins, it's coming by knockout. If Turkali wins, it's either coming by knockout or coming by decision or submission, where he lands multiple takedowns. So they're priced right in the mid-range. They both have a big ceiling. I'm going to have a ton of exposure to this fight. It's actually my favorite fight to target on DraftKings, considering the price and how cheap it is to fit both of these guys in. And do me a favor, guys, before we get to the main card, if you didn't already, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. I do videos like this every single week. I also have a website, fightnumbers.com, where I have additional tools and research for MMA DFS players players and sports bettors. It's all completely free at fightnumbers.com. Now back to the fights. And kicking off the main card in the bantamweight division, we have Said Nurmagomedov, a minus 275 favorite. The comeback on Jonathan Martinez is plus 210. And this is another bet for me. I'm on the underdog here on Jonathan Martinez. I just think both of these guys actually have been historically guys that I don't trust, and I'm probably lower on than the market. But I've also not given Martinez enough credit due to the fact that he's similar to a Chris Gutierrez, where he's able to win a lot of fights because what he does, despite being one-dimensional, he is so far and away one of the best kickers in this division that most of his opponents don't know how to deal with it because he's nonstop with his kicking attack. He's going to throw in volume, and he's really hard to get past those legs, and not many people can figure it out. Now, when you can, I do think you can kind of hurt this guy. His durability's not great. He's been knocked out before by Davey Grant. He's been knocked down before as well in the UFC, so it's not like he's indestructible. This is a really big number for a guy who I think is consistently going to be the better minute winner in this matchup. Said Nurmagomedov is not a bad striker, but he's not a high volume striker, and he's basically throwing a lot of low percentage technique like spinning attacks and stuff like that. Now, he does have a couple submissions on his record. I do think he's the better grappler here, but I think he basically has to grapple to cover this price tag. I don't trust him to do that, and I'm not even sure how much success he'll have if he tries to do that, but he never tries to do that in basically any of his fights. So I think we have a 15-minute kickboxing match for as long as this one lasts, and I already talked about how Martinez, I think, is going to be putting more volume out there. I think he's going to be scoring repeatedly with those leg kicks, so I actually favor Martinez here to get it done on the scorecards. Like I said, I backed him at plus 207 for a unit. I think he's the better minute winner here, and I'm going with the dog in Martinez. Martinez by decision is the official pick, and I think he's a solid underdog target considering how cheap he is on DraftKings this week. Next fight up, we have Ricardo Hamos, a minus 350 favorite. The comeback on Austin Lingo is plus 285. And Ricardo Hamos is another guy who historically is pretty untrustworthy. We've seen him finished in the first round in his last 2 losses. Now, when he's good, he's very good. You know, he mixes in the grappling. He's got a BJJ black belt. He averages over 2.5 takedowns per 15 minutes. But he's another one of those guys where if he's not having that grappling success, I'm not sure I can trust this guy to consistently win minutes because he's low volume on the feet, and he's another guy like Nurmagomedov who's willing to try a lot of spinning techniques and not put a ton of output out there. So I don't really trust him. And then on the flip side, Austin Lingo is a guy who I think is improving. He's 2-1 in the UFC. He's on a 2-fight win streak after losing his UFC debut to Yusuf Zalal, where he was taken down 6 times in that fight. Now, since then, it seems like the takedown defense has been a focus for him. He stuffed a ton of takedowns against Jacob Kilburn in his follow-up fight, and all 5 takedowns against a gassed-up Luis Saldana in that fight as well. Now, that doesn't mean Hamos isn't going to be able to take him down, and I think if he does take him down, Hamos is clearly the better submission grappler, and I think that's why I still slightly edge Hamos in this matchup. I think the line is wide here, but I just think the grappling, if he gets this fight to the ground, I think it's going to be like a night and day type of advantage for him, but I don't trust him to be able to do that consistently because on the feet, Lingo's probably going to be throwing more volume out there, and Austin Lingo has some serious power. Only 3 knockouts on his record, but he has landed a knockdown in both of his previous UFC fights, and like I mentioned, Hamos is not the most durable guy out there. So Hamos is a big favorite, not a big favorite that I would put a ton of confidence in, but I do slightly lean him in this matchup, so we're going Hamos by submission. That's the official pick. And next up, we have a catchweight. This is the previous main event from 2 weeks ago that was scratch. We have Nikita Krylov, a minus 170 favorite, with Ryan Spann on the comeback at plus 145. And as I mentioned, that was the main event that got scratched post-lock. Obviously, people were flaming me on Twitter. It was very entertaining, I'll put it that way, but hopefully it doesn't happen again here. Krylov ended up basically having to be forced out of the fight due to a sickness, which people speculate was due to the weight cut. But regardless, they rebooked the fight. Now it's actually happening. And outside of like the sketchy sickness stuff, which I can't really quantify, my opinion hasn't changed on this matchup. So I'm not going to spend a ton of time on it because I've already broken it down 2 videos ago. So you can go back and watch that for a more in-depth breakdown. But long story short, I don't trust the durability of Ryan Spann. He's been knocked out multiple times in the UFC. He's been hurt and wobbled multiple times, even when he hasn't been knocked out. And I don't know if I trust him outside of a round 1 finish. And that's the one thing that he has, is he can clearly finish guys early. We know that. But I'm not sure he can win minutes if that early finish doesn't materialize. And he's going up against a guy who's a very powerful striker in his own right, in Nikita Krylov, who I think is the much more durable of the two as well. Maybe able to mix in some takedowns. As long as he doesn't get submitted or bonked early in this fight, I just think skill for skill, Krylov's a much better fighter as the fight gets extended here. But I don't think it lasts long. I think Krylov gets a finish in the 2nd or 3rd round. Krylov by TKO is the official pick, but this is a great fight to target on DraftKings, assuming it doesn't get scratched again. Which brings us to the co-main event, as Alexander Romanov comes in as a -150 favorite with Alexander Volkov on the comeback at +130. And you guys don't need me to tell you how dangerous Alexander Romanov is inside of the first 5 minutes. Now, we know he can take guys down. Former sumo wrestler, he averages over 5 takedowns per 15 minutes. Very aggressive when he gets on top of you. He's either landing big ground and pound or hunting for one of his infamous submissions. He's a very dangerous finisher in round 1, like I said. But outside of that, he's a guy who is a gassy boy and is going to fade as the fight gets extended. We've seen that time and time again with him. Now, the problem with predicting his fights is it's very hard to know how often that round 1 finish actually happens. And in this matchup, I do think it probably happens, but it's one where on DraftKings, I know the upside is there for Volkov as well, because he is a good striker in his own right. And we have seen him not necessarily defend a bunch of takedowns. I know he did in the Marcin Tybura fight, but at least in the Curtis Blades fight, he was taken down 14 times, but he was working back to his feet, and we know the cardio is usually on point as well. So it basically just comes down to, do you think Volkov gets finished inside of the first 7 minutes here? I lean that he probably does, but it's not a super confident lean. We're going Romanov by submission, but this is one where I'm going to take the easy way out and basically hedge it on DraftKings. I am going to have a moderate lean towards Romanov, but again, I'm not completely ruling out the fact that we could see an experienced fighter like Volkov, who has had a similar matchup to this before. The one thing is like, he seems to struggle with the athleticism and the explosiveness. Like, he was able to stuff all those Tybura attempts because Tybura is old, fat, and slow. Now, Curtis Blades took him down 14 on 25 attempts or whatever it was. Tom Aspinall took him down twice, submitted him. Like, I just think Romanov has that type of power and explosiveness that Volkov is probably going to struggle with. And if he gets put in a bad spot on the mat, I do think Romanov is going to get him out of there. So Romanov by submission is the official pick, and I think this is a great fight to target on DraftKings. Which brings us to our main event in the bantamweight division, as Petr Yan comes in as a -275 favorite with Merab Dvalishvili on the comeback at +210. And this is one where I do favor the Petr Yan side. I know there's a lot of love for Dvalishvili out there. I just don't see it, man. Like, obviously the guy is very entertaining. He's fun to watch. He's got a very high motor, relentless grappler. He averages the most takedowns per 15 minutes in the division. I just don't think it's going to work against Petr Yan, who's historically had very good takedown defense at 90%. In the 2 Aljamain Sterling fights, he went 3 of 39 takedown attempts against Petr Yan. And obviously, once you get Yan down, yes, Aljo can take the back and control him. Merab's never been a good control grappler. The reason why he lands so many takedowns is because guys are consistently working back to their feet. So I don't rate him as much of a control guy in this matchup. I don't think he's going to be able to take Yan down consistently, and I definitely don't think he's going to be able to control him. So then I think we have more of a striking match where I think Merab has almost nothing in the stand-up for Petr Yan. Petr Yan's a much better striker, has a ton more weapons with the elbows, the knees. He's a guy that builds into fights. While he does start slow, he's going to take over as this fight goes on, and I actually think he gets a late stoppage here. Merab, yes, he's been through the ringer and never been knocked out, but we've seen him hurt time and time again now. I think the knockout's coming, and I actually think it comes this weekend. I think early prices on Petr Yan was an amazing bet. I think he's even fine to parlay at this price. I know the price is blown out. I'm not sure if I'm going to have any type of action, but I do feel confident that he wins. I can't get there on Merab. He's been great to us on this run, but this is just a bad stylistic matchup for him and one where I think he pays the price. So we're going Petr Yan by TKO. That's the official pick. And as always, guys, fightnumbers.com. You'll have my DraftKings player rankings broken down by salary tier. You'll have ownership projections as well. A couple other things. It's all completely free. Check it out, fightnumbers.com. And as always, appreciate your support. Best of luck, and we'll see you guys next time.